The laughter began at the door. It was not loud laughter. Almack's was not the kind of room where laughter was loud, because the particular social economy of Almack's ran on precision, and imprecision in any form was the currency of the second rate. It was the laughter of 3 women standing near the refreshment table, who had mastered the art of communicating a great deal through the slight lowering of a fan and a shared glance of approximately 1 second's duration. They communicated, "Look at that dress." The dress was 2 seasons past its last relevance and had been made, clearly, by someone whose experience of London fashion was theoretical rather than practical. It was not poorly made. Whoever had constructed it had understood the principles of the relevant techniques, but it had the specific quality of a garment assembled in a country where the silhouette and the trimming of the previous season had arrived by correspondence rather than observation. The color was correct. The cut was a measure behind. The trim was almost right. Almost right at Almack's in October of 1815 was considerably worse than simply wrong. The woman wearing the dress was perhaps 24. She was accompanied by a governess of the grim and elderly variety, which was itself a statement. One came to Almack's with a mother, or an aunt, or a social sponsor of sufficient standing to communicate something about the person being presented. A governess communicated, "There is no one else." She had a letter in her hand, which she presented to the patroness at the door, with the composure of a woman who understood that her entry to the room was not guaranteed, and who had chosen to regard this as a logistical matter rather than a humiliation. She was plain in the way of women who have not arranged their face for observation, not without features, but wearing them as one wore a coat on a practical errand, rather than a social occasion. She looked at the room with the specific, systematic attention of a woman reading a landscape, and she read it the way she had apparently been reading things all her life, completely, without performing the reading. Lady Castlemore, who had made the first comment with her fan, told her companion that the creature was either desperately hopeful or completely without self-awareness, and that the evening would reveal which. By midnight, Lady Castlemore would revise this analysis completely. She would not be the only one. If you are new to Moonlight at Mayfair, stay for this one. The woman in the out-of-fashion dress is about to do something to this room that rooms, like it have been needing for a very long time. Subscribe now, and do not miss what happens next. And if you have been here before, you already know. The women who laughed at the door will be the ones asking her questions before the evening is out. Watch how she does it. Her name was Miss Cordelia Vane, and she had spent the past 5 years in Constantinople. Her father had been the British ambassador to the Ottoman court, a position of considerable diplomatic significance and considerable personal difficulty, conducted in a city that was simultaneously ancient and urgent, and which had required him to maintain the impossible balance of a man representing one empire in the court of another, while a French emperor was conducting the most ambitious military campaign in a century. He had been, by all accounts that Cordelia had access to, brilliant at it. He had also been, by the account she carried and could not share, the man who had taught her everything she knew about the art of being in a room. The art, as her father had described it across years of diplomatic dinners in Constantinople and Ankara and the coastal residencies, was not charm. Charm was a different thing, a thing for people who needed the room to approve of them. The art was attention, the full, specific, genuine attention of a person who looked at whoever was before them and found, in the looking, the thing that was actually interesting about them, which was never the thing the room was looking at. She had been practicing the art since she was 16. She was also, on the evening she arrived at Almack's, 4 months and 3 weeks pregnant, wearing a high-waist gown that had been constructed in Constantinople by a seamstress who had understood the specific technical requirement without being told what it was. The gown was 2 seasons past its last relevance. This had been a calculated decision, arrived at after considerable thought. A gown precisely in the current fashion would have drawn the kind of attention she could not afford, which was the assessing, measuring, detail-noticing attention of women who understood the silhouette and what it could conceal. A gown slightly behind the fashion drew a different kind of attention, the comfortable, slightly contemptuous attention of a room that had already decided what it was looking at. She had spent 2 days in London and had already decided what she was looking at, and it was not what the room thought. She crossed the entrance hall. She gave her letter to the patroness, the letter from her distant aunt, Mrs. Pemberton, which was a genuine letter, and which had obtained for her a voucher that was genuine, and which carried the faint, apologetic warmth of a woman who had done what she could and hoped it would be sufficient. The patroness read the letter. The patroness looked at the dress. The patroness made the infinitesimally small expression of a woman performing her duty. Cordelia thanked her and walked into the room. The first thing she did was find a chair. Not the chairs along the wall. The chairs along the wall were where the people sat who had already been assessed and found insufficient, and where the sitting had become its own verdict. She found a chair near the window that was slightly outside the main social circulation, which was the position her father had always taken at official functions. Close enough to observe everything, removed enough to be approached rather than absorbed, she sat. She looked at the room. She saw 300 people performing the social ritual of a Tuesday evening at Almack's with varying degrees of sincerity and skill. She saw the patronesses managing the room with the specific authority of women who had built an institution out of selective admission and had maintained it for 40 years through the rigorous application of standards whose actual logic was less important than their consistent enforcement. She saw the men clustered at the edges, with the expression of men who had been told they were supposed to enjoy this. She saw the women in their fashionable silhouettes and their correct trimming, making the calculations of an evening that was officially about dancing and functionally about assessment. She saw, in the chair on the opposite side of the room, a man who was not doing any of these things. He was perhaps 30. He was sitting with the quality of a man who had agreed to be in a room without agreeing to participate in it. Not rude, not hostile, but simply absent in the specific way of a person whose actual self was elsewhere. He was watching the dancing with the same expression he might have given a rain shower on a window. A natural phenomenon, acknowledged, requiring nothing. He had, she noted, good hands. She could see them from across the room. Hands that had done work, not the soft, preserved hands of a man who had never used them for anything except correspondence, but hands with the quality of someone who was familiar with effort. She filed this and looked at the rest of the room. The duel problem arrived at 20 minutes past 9. It announced itself in the manner of all imminent duels. A cluster of men near the south wall who had the specific formation of people surrounding something that was generating heat. 2 men at the center, both with the rigid posture of pride that had been addressed, and the particular quality of controlled fury that was the antechamber to demands for satisfaction. Cordelia watched the cluster for 45 seconds, which was sufficient time to identify the relevant elements. The 2 men, who were young and had been drinking moderately, were not the cause. They were the instrument. The cause was a third man, older, standing slightly apart with the expression of a man who had said something, and was watching with interest to see what it produced. She had seen this exact configuration in Constantinople. It was the configuration of a man who had introduced an insult into a room in the expectation that the cultural gap between 2 parties would make the insult invisible to one of them and devastating to the other. She crossed the room. She moved with the specific, unhurried quality of a woman going somewhere she has decided to go, which was different from the purposeful rush that would have drawn attention, and she arrived at the edge of the cluster, at the moment when one of the young men was demanding to know what the other had meant by the remark. She touched the demanding man lightly on the sleeve, just enough to redirect the attention, and she said, in the even tone of someone providing a useful translation, the phrase was a Turkish compliment, a conventional expression of respect for a man's strength of character. She explained the specific construction and its context and its usage in formal Ottoman diplomatic exchange, and she said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of a woman who had been hearing formal Ottoman diplomatic exchange for 5 years and was simply reporting what she knew. The young man looked at her. She looked at him with the attentive, unhurried interest she gave to everyone. He told her his grandmother had taught him the phrase. He had used it meaning to honor his companion's horsemanship. She told him the horsemanship usage was a regional variation and entirely appropriate for the context. She told the companion this also in the specific language of the correction that was not a correction but a clarification, which was the only form of correction she had ever found that people actually received. The cluster dispersed. The 2 young men shook hands with the relieved energy of men who have been given a reason to stand down. The older man who had introduced the problem into the room found, when he looked for Cordelia to see how she had managed it, that she had already moved. She had already moved to the Duchess of Devonshire. The Duchess of Devonshire was standing near the refreshment table with the specific, managed quality of a woman who was enduring a migraine and was not going to let it be known that she was enduring it, because knowing it was the admission of a vulnerability, and she had not built her position in this room on the admission of vulnerabilities. Cordelia observed this from approximately 8 feet away and approached with the particular directness that she applied to everything that required action. She told the Duchess quietly enough that the women nearby did not hear, that she had a preparation in her reticule that a Turkish physician had given her in 1812, and that had, in her own experience with a similar complaint, produced considerable relief within 20 minutes. She told her it was pressed feverfew and willow bark in a specific preparation, and that its properties were well documented in medical literature of the previous century, and that she was not offering it as a mystery but as a practical remedy. The Duchess looked at her. Cordelia looked back with the expression she gave to everything, the full, clear, unhurried attention that her father had called the only respectful form of looking. The Duchess accepted the preparation. At 20 minutes past 10, the Duchess's headache was considerably reduced, and the Duchess was telling Lady Castlemore, with a warmth that had been absent from her manner for the preceding 2 hours, that the young woman in the out-of-fashion dress was the most sensible person she had met all season. Lady Castlemore looked across the room at Cordelia Vane with a revised expression. The waltz happened at 10:30, which was when the room experienced its most significant rearrangement. The waltz had been arriving at Almack's by degrees for 2 years. It was too continental, too intimate, too revolutionary in its geometry to have entered without a period of controlled controversy, and on the evenings when it was permitted the room watched it with the combined interest of the titillated and the appalled. It required partners who knew the steps, which was a criterion that eliminated most of the room. The band began. The man with the good hands was standing at the edge of the floor. He had been standing at various edges of various parts of the room all evening, always slightly apart, always with the quality of a man present and uninvested. He was Lord Ambrose Hartwell, she had been told by the governess, who had been providing quiet information throughout the evening with the specific competence of a woman who had been attending these rooms for 30 years and knew every visible person in them. Lord Hartwell's wife had died in childbed 3 years ago. He had been attending social functions since at his mother's insistence, and had not, in 3 years, been observed to actually participate in one. Cordelia walked across the floor and asked him to dance. Not in the conventional form. The form was for men to ask women, and the form was not what she had in mind. She walked to him, and she told him she was newly arrived from Constantinople and had been dancing the waltz for 3 years, and was aware that in this room the waltz required a partner, and she did not have one, and she thought he looked as though the evening could use an interruption. He looked at her. He had eyes that were, she noted, the specific grey-green of the Bosphorus on a morning in November, not a colour the English usually managed, which required a sky that knew something about distance. He told her he had not danced in 3 years. She told him, then this evening will have produced something. He looked at her for a long moment in the way that she was beginning to identify as his characteristic mode. The consideration of a man who did not act without thinking, and who was, in the thinking, actually present rather than managing his own deliberation for an audience. He offered his hand. She took it. The waltz was what the waltz always was in the hands of 2 people who knew how to dance it. A conversation conducted without words, which was the only form of conversation in which the conventional restrictions on what could be said did not apply. She danced with the fluency of 5 years of diplomatic functions in Constantinople, where the waltz had been old news since the end of the previous century, and where the dancing had the specific quality of a civilization that understood that the body communicated things the tongue was not permitted. He danced with the careful, deliberate quality of a man who had learned to do a thing well a long time ago, and had not forgotten but had stored the learning somewhere that required a particular kind of access to retrieve. The room watched. Lady Castlemore's fan was lowered and had not been raised again. 3 of the patronesses were at the edge of the floor. The Duchess of Devonshire, whose headache had been considerably reduced, was watching with the expression of a woman who had decided she was interested. By the end of the waltz, the room had revised its assessment of the woman in the out-of-fashion dress 3 times and was working on a 4th. When the music ended, Ambrose told her, "Thank you." She told him, "The thanks are equal." He told her, with the specific directness of a man who had apparently decided, in the course of a waltz, to begin participating, "The evening has produced something." She looked at him. She told him yes. She went back to her chair near the window. He watched her go. He did not look away for some time. The three heiresses were an accident, or what looked like an accident, which was the best kind. She had been in conversation with a woman named Miss Forsyth, who had been brought to Almack's by her mother in the specific, purposeful way of a woman, who understood that the marriage market had seasons and that October was one of them, and that her daughter's third season was approaching the point of diminishing returns. Miss Forsyth was 21, intelligent, bored, and wearing the expression of a woman who had been attending Almack's with her mother for 3 seasons and had not yet found a way to explain to her mother that the marriage market's requirements and her own were different in ways that she did not have the language for. Cordelia sat beside her. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the dancing. Then she told Miss Forsyth, in the easy tone of a woman sharing an observation rather than beginning a campaign, that she had been reading a paper by a mathematician named Gauss in Constantinople, who had developed a method of calculation that produced results the previous century's mathematicians had considered impossible, and that the method was, when you understood the underlying principle, extraordinarily beautiful. Miss Forsyth looked at her. Cordelia told her the underlying principle. She told it the way her father had taught her to tell any complex thing, from the part that was already known, building outward, checking that each step had landed before proceeding to the next. Miss Forsyth understood it in approximately 6 minutes, which was faster than Cordelia had understood it in 1813, and said so. 2 other young women had drifted toward the conversation during the 6 minutes, attracted by the specific quality of a discussion that was clearly not about the dancing or the suitors or the fabric of a dress. By the time Cordelia had moved to Gauss's second method, there were 5 people listening, 4 of whom were young women who had been brought to Almack's by mothers with specific ambitions and who were experiencing, for the first time in 3 seasons, a conversation that required them to actually think. The 5th was Lord Hartwell, who had drifted to the edge of the group with the expression of a man who had not intended to drift there and found, upon arriving, that the drifting was interesting. At midnight, Lady Castlemore approached Cordelia as she was taking a glass of lemonade and asked, with the specific directness of a woman who had decided to be direct, "Who are you?" Cordelia told her. "Miss Cordelia Vane. My father was the ambassador to Constantinople." Lady Castlemore told her, "That is your father. Who are you?" Cordelia looked at her. She looked at her with the full, clear, unhurried attention. She told her, "I am the woman in the out-of-fashion dress who has spent the evening finding the interesting thing in every room she enters." She told her, "I suspect you are also that woman, and that the fan has been in the way of it for some time." Lady Castlemore stared at her. Then Lady Castlemore laughed, not the small fan-lowered laughter of the door, the real thing, the surprised, genuine laugh of a woman who has been found out in the most flattering possible way. She told Cordelia, "You will come to dinner on Thursday." Cordelia told her she would be delighted. She arrived home to her lodgings at midnight. She did not have lodgings, officially. She had a room in the house of her aunt's friend Mrs. Hammond, who had agreed to provide a temporary situation out of the complicated obligation of a woman who owed Mrs. Pemberton several small favors and had found this a manageable way to discharge them. The arrangement was comfortable, and Mrs. Hammond asked no questions, which was the most valuable quality any arrangement could have at this precise moment. She sat on the edge of the bed. She put her hand on her stomach, which she did every evening, in the specific way of a person marking the presence of something that was going to require very difficult decisions. The decisions were already made. She had made them on the ship from Constantinople, in the long, rolling weeks of the journey home, in the specific way she made all difficult decisions, by examining every option and its consequences, and arriving at the one that was the least terrible of the available choices. Her sister Margaret was married to a kind man named Sir George Hartley, who was childless and who had been childless for 8 years of marriage, and who had said to Cordelia in a letter the previous spring that the absence of children was the great sorrow of his life and Margaret's. Margaret was not unkind. Margaret had been frightened for Cordelia since the news of the uprising, and the letter she had received 3 weeks ago, telling her sister that she was alive and coming home and needed to speak to her on a matter of importance had produced a response of warm relief and unconditional welcome. The plan was she would go to Margaret, she would explain. Margaret and Sir George would take the child, raise it as their own, and Cordelia would go. She was not yet certain where, but away. Somewhere a woman with her skills and without her history could build something. She lay down. She thought about Almax and the woman with the fan and the Duchess of Devonshire and the three heiresses and Gauss and the waltz. She thought about the man with the good hands who had told her the evening had produced something with the specific directness of a man who had decided to begin participating, she thought. I cannot afford Lord Hartwell. I cannot afford to be found interesting by someone whose interest I might find valuable in a different life. She put her hand on her stomach again. She thought, there is only this life, there is only the plan. She slept. October became November. She went to Lady Castlemore's dinner, and to the Forsyth Musicale, and to the Duchess of Devonshire's afternoon gathering, and at all of them she did what she had done at Almax. Found the interesting thing, gave the full attention, treated everyone as the most interesting person in the room, which was possible because she actually found everyone the most interesting person in the room when she looked at them correctly, and looking correctly was the art. The ton became interested in her secret, the specific, particular, Mayfair quality interest that was the most useful form of social attention. The interest of a room that has decided a person is a puzzle worth solving. Was she a princess in exile, the widow of a diplomat, a woman with connections too significant to name openly? She was known to speak Turkish, Arabic and French with equal fluency, to understand Ottoman court protocol, to have an opinion on the current parliamentary situation that suggested access to information that was not publicly available. She was also known, quietly, to have turned down 3 separate men who had expressed interest in pursuing an acquaintance towards something more formal. She had done this with the specific warmth of a woman who was not rejecting the men, but declining an arrangement, and she had done it in such a way that none of them had left the conversation feeling diminished, which was itself a form of the art. Lord Hartwell was not among the 3 men who had expressed formal interest. He was, however, among the regular attendees at the occasions where she was present. He appeared at Lady Castlemore's second dinner, and at the Forsyth Musicale, and, on a Tuesday morning in November, in the Lending Library in Piccadilly, which she had been visiting every Tuesday for 3 weeks. She looked at him over the shelf. He told her, I did not follow you here. She told him, I know, you were here before me. He acknowledged this. He told her he came every Tuesday for the mathematics section. She told him, so do I. He told her the Gauss paper. She told him yes. They stood on opposite sides of the shelf in the Lending Library and looked at each other through the gap between the volumes in the way of 2 people who are in the same place by coincidence and are both deciding whether to acknowledge that the coincidence is not uncomfortable. He moved around the shelf. He asked her with the direct quality she had noted at Almax. Was she well? She told him she was well. She told him the question was unusual. He told her he asked it because she had the specific expression, occasionally, of a woman managing something significant, and he recognized the expression because he had worn it for a considerable time himself. She looked at him. He told her he was not pressing, he was noting. He told her there was a significant distinction. She told him she noted the distinction, which produced on his face the very small, very private expression that she had come to understand was his version of amusement. Contained, genuine, directed entirely at the specific thing she had said. She told him she was managing something. She told him it was not available to be discussed, and she hoped he would receive that as the honest account rather than a deflection. He told her he received it as the honest account. She good. She selected her book. He selected his. They left the library separately, but in the same direction, and when the direction converged at the corner of Piccadilly and St. James's, he asked her whether she would walk for a while, because the day was good, and he told her, that the Tuesday Lending Library was more useful when followed by a walk. She told him she found the same. They walked for an hour. He talked about mathematics, and she talked about Constantinople, and they talked about the war, which had ended 4 months ago with a finality that Europe was still absorbing, and about what the peace meant for the diplomatic world her father had inhabited. He talked about his estate in Wiltshire, which he managed with the same careful attention he brought to everything. He asked questions in the manner she had come to expect from him. Not the questions designed to seem interested, but the questions of a person who actually wanted to know the answer, and was prepared for the answer to be complicated. She recognized on the walk back to Mrs. Hammond's, doing the thing she had told herself she could not afford. She was finding him valuable. She visited Margaret in December. The carriage to Hertfordshire took 4 hours. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the winter countryside, and thought about what she was going to say and how, and she arrived at Margaret's house with the oilcloth of it prepared in the same methodical way. She prepared all difficult things. Margaret received her in the drawing-room with the warm, anxious relief of a woman who has been frightened for her sitter for a long time and is glad to have her present and solid in a chair in the drawing-room. She was 4 years older than Cordelia and had her mother's face, which was the face Cordelia missed most, and she held Cordelia's hands for a long moment before anything was said. When the tea was brought, and Sir George had been introduced and had retired to his study, with the tactful sensitivity of a man who understood that what was about to occur required the room. When all of this was done, and the fire was the warmest thing, and the winter afternoon was the grey, outside the windows, Cordelia told her sister. She told her everything, the full account. Not the managed version, not the version that began in the middle and withheld the context. Her husband Halil, whom she had married in Constantinople in the spring of 1814, a man of the diplomatic class, educated in Paris, working in the Ottoman Foreign Ministry, who had been killed in a civil disturbance in April of 1815 when the political situation had collapsed with the sudden and total finality of things that have been unstable for a long time and fall at last. The child, which was Halil's, which was now 5 months along, which she had been managing through Almack's and Lady Castlemore's dinners and the Tuesday lending library, with the specific, precise attention required to manage it invisibly. She told Margaret the plan. The plan was received by Margaret's face in a sequence that Cordelia watched with the full, attentive care she gave to everything that mattered. First, love. The open, immediate love of a woman who sees her sister's situation completely and wants to help. Then fear, the specific, particular fear of a woman who has a position in a world that runs on reputation, who has a husband whose standing in that world depends on reputation, who has been managing her own social situation with the same careful precision as Cordelia and who understands immediately and in full what the plan would require. Then, the silence. Margaret told her. The child would be Turkish. Or half, Cordelia told her. Yes, Margaret told her. Hertfordshire would know. People always knew. Cordelia told her she understood. Margaret told her Sir George would be willing. She knew he would be willing. He would not hesitate. But the world, she stopped. She started again. She told Cordelia that she loved her and that she was sorry, and that sorry was the most insufficient word in the English language, and she was using it anyway, because it was the only one available. She told her that she was frightened. She told her that she wished she were braver. Cordelia sat with her sister in the drawing-room in Hertfordshire, and received the answer to the plan she had been carrying since Constantinople. She told Margaret, I know. She told her, I came because I needed to know, and now I know, and I love you. She took the carriage back to London in the dark. She sat with her hands in her lap for 4 hours, and she thought about America. She had been thinking about America since June, not as a plan, not until December when the plan became necessary, as a place that had, in its specific New World quality, the particular characteristic she required. It was large enough that a woman with an unconventional history could find a corner of it where the unconventional history was less unusual than the capabilities it had produced. Her father had known people in Boston, in Philadelphia, in the emerging cities of the young country. She had her father's letters. She had her languages. She had 5 years of diplomatic experience and a working knowledge of 3 cultures and the specific practical intelligence of a woman who had been solving impossible problems by candlelight for most of her adult life. She could build something in America. Not easily, nothing she had done had been easy, but possible. She was 6 months along. She had money enough for the passage and something left over. She had the baby's existence to consider, which meant the baby's future, which meant a country where the baby's parentage was not the ledger entry that determined every other entry. She began arranging it in January, the booking, the practical arrangements for the child's needs in the first weeks, the letters to her father's contacts that were careful enough to produce an introduction and imprecise enough to produce no questions. She did all of this with the same systematic precision she had applied to everything since the age of 16, because the plan required it to be right, and she did not do things she could not make right. She continued attending the social occasions, because disappearing from them abruptly would produce exactly the kind of attention she could not afford in the final weeks before departure. She went to Lady Castlemore's third dinner, and to the evening at the Forsyth House, and to the Tuesday lending library. Ambrose was at the lending library. He had been there every Tuesday. They had fallen into the habit of the walk after, the hour in the cold January, streets, the questions and the answers, the specific quality of a conversation that proceeded at the pace of the thing, rather than the pace of what was socially comfortable. He had told her about his wife, not in detail, but the outline, the essential shape of the loss. She had received it with the full attention it deserved and had said, "I am sorry for the 3 years of it." She had meant the grief rather than the death, because grief was the thing that went on living after the thing that caused it, and she understood this from a different source than he did. On the last Tuesday of January, he told her she was leaving. He said it not as a question, but as the observation of a man who had been paying attention and had noticed the specific quality of a person. Concluding arrangements, she looked at him across the mathematics section. She told him, yes, he told her, when. She told him, the 15th of February. He asked her where. She told him, America. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the shelf. He looked at her. He told her he would like to ask something, and that he was asking it as her friend rather than as anything else, and that she should answer in the same register, and not with the management she sometimes applied to things she found too significant to be direct. About she told him to ask. He asked, was she safe? She told him, yes. He told her the whole account. She looked at him. He looked at her with the grey-green eyes and the expression of a man who had been paying the full, specific, genuine attention for 4 months, and who was not asking out of social obligation or prurient interest, but out of the specific concern of a person who understood that something significant was happening and was not willing to be kind at the expense of being useful. She looked at the mathematics shelf. She told him. Not all of it, not the full account she had given Margaret, but enough. Halil and the uprising, and the child and the plan and the plan's failure and America. He was very still through all of it. He did not manage his expression for her benefit. He simply received it in the way she had come to understand was his mode, the full, attending reception of a man who was actually there. When she finished, the room was quiet. He told her, I have something I would like to propose. He told her, not a proposal in the form that word usually takes, because he was not asking anything from her and was not going to. He told her, I have been thinking about what would be most useful to you, and I have found that the thinking has produced something that I want to offer, and which you should refuse if it is wrong, and which I have done regardless so that the option exists even if you refuse it. She looked at him. He told her he had purchased a house. He told her the house was in Wiltshire, which was his county, which had the specific advantage of being a county where a woman with an unconventional situation was less extraordinary than in London and more supported than in America. He told her the house was well situated, with good light and a kitchen garden, and a room that could be a study and a room that could be a nursery and a room for a woman of his acquaintance, who was a midwife of considerable experience and who had agreed, subject to Cordelia's consent, to be available. He told her the house was hers to use as she chose, for as long as she chose, with no requirement attached to it, no expectation, no obligation, no claim on her future or her decisions or her freedom. It was a house. It was available. It was hers if she wanted it. He told her he would be her neighbor or her friend or her co-parent if she wished, or simply the person 3 miles down the road who had a library she was welcome to use on Tuesdays. He told her whatever she wanted was the arrangement, and whatever she preferred was respected. He told her he was not doing this because he expected anything from it. He told her, and here the quiet, direct quality of his voice had something in it that she recognized as the specific weight of a thing a person says only when they mean it entirely, and are not managing the meaning. He was doing it because the world had given her an insufficient number of options, and he found himself in the fimpled position of being able to add one, and adding it seemed more useful than not. She stood in the Piccadilly Lending Library in January 1816 and looked at Lord Ambrose Hartwell with the full, specific, unmanaged attention that was the only form of attention she trusted. She thought about Constantinople and the ship, and the 4 hours in the carriage, from Hertfordshire in the dark and the Tuesday evenings, and America and all the calculations, she thought, he is offering me freedom. Not rescue, freedom. The specific distinction between a man who saves a woman by making her dependent on the saving and a man who gives a woman the choice. She had met the first kind often enough in Constantinople and in London to know the difference precisely. She thought, my father's art was finding the interesting thing in the room. I have been practicing it for 9 years. I have found, in this room on every Tuesday for 4 months, the most interesting persons I have met since my father died. She told him, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the register that is most honest rather than most kind. He told her, ask, she asked. Did he understand what this would cost him? The house and the arrangement and the child of an Ottoman diplomat and the social consequence of the whole. He told her he had considered it carefully and he found the cost acceptable because the alternative was a woman of extraordinary quality, departing for America alone on the 15th of February, and this was a worse outcome than the cost by a significant margin. He told her he had never been good at accepting worse outcomes when better ones were available. She told him, the arrangement, if I accept it, it is an arrangement between equals and I will manage my own situation and my own decisions and my own child, and you will not manage any of those things on my behalf. He told her, yes, that was the arrangement, she told him. And if it becomes, she found the form, if it becomes something that contains more than a library on Tuesdays and a house 3 miles from yours, I will say so in plain language, and I expect the same from you, because I have had enough of things that were not said plainly. He told her, you will have it. She looked at the mathematics shelf one more time. She told him, I will not go to America. He received this with the expression she knew, the contained, genuine, entirely specific response to a thing that had happened correctly. She told him, Wednesday. He told her, Wednesday. The baby was born in April in the house in Wiltshire, in the good light of a morning that had decided to be warm. Ambrose was 3 miles down the road at the time of the birth and was informed by the midwife who sent word at 9:30 in the manner of a woman reporting the successful completion of a project she had always expected to complete successfully. He arrived at 11. He stood in the doorway of the room, not entering, not performing the arrival, but present in the specific way that was his characteristic mode. Cordelia was in the bed with her daughter. The daughter was small and complete and had, already at 11 o'clock on the morning of her existence, the dark eyes and the specific quality of attention of a person who intended to look carefully at everything she encountered. Cordelia looked at Ambrose in the doorway. He looked at her daughter. She told him, her name is Layla. She told him, it is Turkish, she told him. Her father's name was Halil Demir, and he was an Ottoman diplomat who died in a civil disturbance in April of 1815, and she is proud of his name, and her daughter will know it. He received this in the specific way she had come to expect from him. As information, to be held with the same care as everything else, without the performance of equanimity. He told her Layla. He told her, it is a good name. She told him, yes. He came into the room and he sat in the chair near the window, and he looked at the daughter who had her father's eyes and Cordelia's specific quality of attention, and neither of them said anything for some time. And the Wiltshire morning was warm and the light was good, and the house was the house it had been arranged to be. She married him on a Thursday in September, not because the world required it, and not because the arrangement required it, and not because the 7 months between April and September had produced the kind of social pressure that usually produced marriage. She married him because she had spent 7 months in the arrangement he had described. The house and the library on Tuesdays and the conversations, and the specific daily accumulation of a life built alongside another person's life. And because what had accumulated was the real thing, which she had not been looking for, and had found anyway. She told him this, on the Thursday morning before they went to the church, in the plainest possible language. She told him, I want to be clear that this is not gratitude. I am not marrying you because you purchased a house and provided a midwife, and gave me the choice, because those things were the right things to do, and they do not create an obligation. I am marrying you because the 7 months have produced the specific, particular, irreplaceable quality of a life that is better with you in it than without, and because Layla should know you as her father, and because you are the most direct and honest man I have known since my own father died, and I find I want to be dangerous with you for the foreseeable future. He told her, that is the most complete declaration I have ever received. She told him, I have Turkish, French, and Arabic if the English is insufficient. He told her the English was entirely sufficient. She told him, good. She told him, the church in 20 minutes, he told her. I have arranged a carriage, she told him. I know, I can see it from the window, he told her. And the expression was the contained, genuine thing. Of course you can. The Tun never learned her secret. They knew she was remarkable. They knew she was the woman who had arrived at Almack's in an out-of-fashion dress, and by midnight had prevented a duel and cured a duchess, and danced the waltz and taught 3 heiresses about Gauss. They knew she was the woman who turned every conversation toward its most interesting possibility and who found the remarkable in every person she looked at. They knew she had married Lord Hartwell, the quiet baronet with the good hands who had not participated in a social occasion for 3 years and who had been observed, at every occasion after the evening of the waltz, participating with the specific, attentive quality of a man who had remembered why. They knew she had a daughter named Layla, who was dark-eyed and precise in her attention, and who grew up in Wiltshire learning English and Turkish, from her mother and mathematics from her father and the art of looking carefully at everything from both. They knew, or thought they knew, that her secret was some quality of character that could not be replicated, some gift for attention, some particular kind of intelligence. Lady Castlemore asked her once, directly in the manner she had adopted after the evening at Almack's, when Cordelia had told her the fan had been in the way, what was the secret? Cordelia told her, there is no secret. I look at whoever is in front of me and I find the interesting thing, and I tell them I have found it, and I am honest about what I find. She told her, the interesting thing is always there. Most people do not look for it because they have arranged themselves to be found interesting rather than to find it. Lady Castlemore told her, that sounds simple. Cordelia told her, it is the least simple thing there is. It requires you to stop performing and start attending. Most people find the performance more comfortable. Lady Castlemore looked at her. Cordelia looked back with the full, unhurried, genuine attention. Lady Castlemore told her, I have been performing since 1797. Cordelia told her, I know. She told her, you are considerably more interesting than the performance. Lady Castlemore put down her fan. She did not pick it up again that evening, and perhaps that is why this story will not let us go. Not because the dress was out of fashion, or the duel was prevented, or the Duchess's headache was resolved with pressed feverfew and willow bark. Not because the waltz was danced, or Gauss was explained, or a man with good hands decided, in the course of 4 months of Tuesday libraries, that the world was better with a particular person in it. But because of what she did at the door. She arrived at Almack's with no sponsor but a governess, no introduction but a distant aunt's letter, no dress but last season's construct. The room laughed. She absorbed the laughter the way she absorbed everything, as information correctly filed. And she walked in. She did not walk in because she was brave. She walked in because she had spent 5 years in Constantinople learning that every room was just people. And people were just the most interesting thing available, if you looked at them correctly, and the looking correctly was the only art she had that could not be taken from her. They laughed at her at the door. She spent the evening finding the interesting thing in every one of them. That is the whole of the art. That is the whole of the secret. And it is the least simple thing in the world. To stop performing and to attend. To stop waiting to be found remarkable, and to find the remarkable in whoever is before you. She had learned it from a diplomat in Constantinople who had spent 20 years representing one empire in the court of another without losing the ability to find every person in every room the most interesting person alive. She had learned it by the time she was 20. She had brought it to Almack's in a dress that was 2 seasons past